Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Fashion Institute of Technology, Dr. Joyce F. Brown.
February is Black History Month. It's an occasion for celebration. The achievements, after all, have been vast and plentiful and hard-earned. But it's also an occasion for reflection. February 4th happens to be the birth date of Rosa Parks, who 66 years ago inspired the powerful Montgomery bus boycott when she refused to give up her seat on the bus for a white passenger. Imagine the inner strength, the fortitude that act of defiance required. That act of defiance, of sheer bravery, was another step in the long march of history that led to the election 53 years later of the first African American as the President of the United States, and then just last month to the swearing in of our first woman of color as Vice President of the United States. Kamala Harris, a woman whose dreams were filled with ambition. Kamala Harris, half Jamaican, half South Asian, married to a white man with stepchildren, nieces, and nephews of all shades and color. Her family every bit the gorgeous mosaic that New York City's first and only Black mayor, David Dinkins, used to invoke as he contemplated the city itself. We celebrate Kamala Harris, the very symbol of a country committed to all cultures and colors and characters and conditions of man, as the young poet Amanda Gorton said on inaugural day. But it has also been just a few short months since we witnessed George Floyd being asphyxiated by a white police officer. So as we contemplate Black History Month, we're left with a paradox, a contradiction between the strength of our commitment to all cultures and colors and our capacity as a country for blind bigotry and the violence it provokes. Black History Month was established in 1926 by a Harvard-educated historian named Carter Woodson. He was a son of slaves. He made it his business to correct the racist bias he found in history books that ignored or distorted the Black American experience. When he launched Black History Month, he didn't expect it to last. He was confident that soon enough, Black Americans and their history would enter the nation's mainstream so that a special day, a week, or month would not be necessary. Yet here we are, 95 years later, 58 years since Dr. King offered his great dream, 57 years since the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and 9 months since George Floyd uttered his last terrifying words. For all of the progress, all of the achievements of Black America, our nation remains scarred by the legacy of violence and hatred and bigotry. As Ms. Gordon said, it's the past we step into and how we repair it. In this regard, FIT is no different from the rest of the nation. We have our own long, lingering biases, and they have caused untold pain to students and employees of color. Over the past year, we have tackled this issue head-on and with candor, and we have started the long, arduous task of repair and rehabilitation right here on campus. Simultaneously, we are working with leaders in the creative industries whose ranks are filled by our alumni, but not so much by alumni of color. Just as an example, in one recent survey of the creative class, only 8.5% of jobs were held by Blacks, and in another survey, this one of the graphic design industry alone, just 3% of jobs were held by Blacks. Data about leadership positions are equally discouraging. So together with our industry partners, we're building a social justice institute that looks to the future, determined to effect the systemic changes that ensure that full opportunity is as attainable for Kamala Harris and her blended family as it is for their white counterparts. We take these steps out of the strength of our commitment. We do it because we know it is right. We do it because inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Again, quoting from Ms. Gordon. We do it to honor Rosa Parks and Dr. King and John Lewis and Kamala Harris and the spirit of Black History Month. We do it to honor the first Black president of the United States, Barack Obama, who said, "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek."
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Greetings, everyone. Before we continue with our celebration, let's take a moment to listen to the Black National Anthem. Greetings. My name is Dr. Ron Island. I am the Chief Diversity Officer at the Fashion Institute of Technology. And on behalf of President Dr. Joyce F. Brown and members of the Black History Planning Committee, I extend greetings and welcome you to FIT's Black History Month celebration. Lift Every Voice and Sing, often referred to as the Black National Anthem in the United States, was a hymn written by James Johnson in 1900, and it was set to music by his brother for the anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birthday in 1905. Since that time, the anthem has served as a way for African Americans to come together based on a common history, experiences, and current realities. This year's Black History Month's theme focuses on the Black family. It's this theme that we have developed our programming for our month-long celebration. And on a personal note today, I would like to thank and recognize and pay dear respect to the Black women in my family who helped me get to where I am, and also to all the other pioneers who helped provide the foundation needed to help us to grow and to be wonderful human beings. And it is my hope that we will continue that tradition. Before introducing our distinguished keynote speaker, I would like to thank the following departments and people for their help and support in making today's celebration possible: the Office of the President, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Office of Student Life, the Office of Educational Opportunity Programs, the Division of External Relations, Media Services, and I must give a high five to Media Services for their help today, and also to the members of the Black History Month Planning Committee, Joy Bailey, Tor Orange, Michelle Van Ice, and Letitia Brown. With a village, everything is possible, and I am thankful to be a part of this wonderful village. We have so many wonderful events scheduled for this month. A panel discussion on Wall Street, to presentations on structural racism, to a cooking demonstration, and a wonderful conversation between Stella Jean and our own Valerie Steele. And finally, an awesome virtual Back to the Present student exhibit is now open. In addition to the events, President Brown has a call for proposals for Black History Month. The proposals may range from panel discussions, art expeditions, literature and poetry, interviews, research material, and white papers. Any medium that will allow us as a college community to come together and discuss, better understand, and remember and celebrate the Black family, its history and impact that history has had on our culture and society. Submissions are due by February 8th. More details are available in the Office of the President's email and also the FIT's Black History Month's website, which lists all of the programs available for this month as well. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today our keynote speaker. Hi, Anderson is an award-winning writer, educator, cultural strategist, and founder of Create Forward, a social impact that powers the art of design to deliver experiences that advance equality and justice. She is the founder of Create Forward. She founded Create Forward after 16 years spent designing and managing programs for youth development, arts education, and social justice organizations. Now, as a consultant and cultural strategist, she utilized her interdisciplinary skill sets, which combine somatic embodiment practice, applied theater, empowerment coaching, and community organizing to provide capacity building support, training, and community engagement strategy for nonprofits committed to advancing social and racial equality. In the spring 2016, Anderson was awarded the TED residency to develop an innovative storytelling project called Mass Story Lab. Mass Story Lab has traveled to 9 cities across the United States using storytelling, dialogue, and collective visioning to support communities to imagine a world beyond prisons. The project catalyzed the creation of the Rikers Island Public Memory Project, for which Anderson is the project lead. Piper Anderson is a professor at NYU, teaching courses in justice, criminal justice system. She's also the founding member of the steering committee and faculty of NYU's Prison Education Program, a degree program for men currently incarcerated in Walk Hill Correctional Facility. And is a recipient of the 2016 Culture Push Fellow for Utopian Practice, a 2017 Civic Hall Organizer in Residence, and a finalist for the Columbia University June Jordan Fellowship. She's completed her undergraduate studies at the New School, Gold New School. I was also at the New School, and also where she was a Writing Democracy Fellow, and finally a Master's in Art and Applied Theater at CUNY. It is with pleasure to introduce Piper Anderson to the FIT community. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Millen. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you, FIT, for inviting me to speak to you all today and be a part of your Black History Month celebration. I wanted to today really talk about something that is kind of core to who I am, core to my work, and has been kind of a central driving force for me, particularly in the last decade. And that is public memory, and the importance of memory and helping to shape any kind of future that we want to create for ourselves. I have to always start by, first really acknowledging the land that I'm standing on the land of the Lenape people. I also have to acknowledge the ancestors who were brought here against their will and have built this country on their backs. We need to celebrate Black history every single day because Black history is American history. And the story of Black people is one of having to constantly save this country from itself. That is what we do again and again and again. We show up in elections, we show up in the streets, we show up in every single industry and in every single elected body working to make this union live up to its ideals. And that commitment and that interest in memory for me begins with my family, with the ways that memory, the ways that we would get together and tell stories, and that the act of storytelling and to tell the stories of our family was what Saidiya Hartman calls critical fabulation, a way of telling stories that awakens alternative histories and offers a set of techniques and orientations for fabulating its future. For us, the necessity of memory was an act of resistance, a way to hold the complexity of who we were, the contradictions of that, to not be overwhelmed and buried by the ways that systemic inequality made even our own relationships with each other that much more complex at times. The act of critical fabulation was also about defining and designing who we wanted to be. And so when I look back on, family gatherings and times when we would come together. And the stories that would get told. I think when I was younger, particularly when I was a student, I had this very strong desire for facts and for accuracy. And even now, as I'm sort of the family griot, I like do all the genealogical research. I have to challenge myself whenever I find myself constantly looking for proof and evidence, right? Which is what academia conditions us to do all the time. And to trust that the narratives that we carry with us, even if there is no fact or evidence, have true value in the ways that they shape our future. So memory for me really is rooted in a desire to create the future, to create possibilities, and to truly reckon with the impact of systemic inequality, of a legacy of slavery and racial terror that has shaped us in this country. On a broader scale, we can think of public memory, right? Collective memory, particularly as it relates to the Black experience, as being a powerful tool of critical Black remembrance, which, there's some incredible scholars who are doing work now in the way of capturing photographic evidence. People like Lee Rayford and Sarah Lewis and Deb Willis. And so we have a lot of literature that shows us that the use of even photographs to document our stories has been critical to, one, resisting erasure, and proof that we have participated in this project of building democracy in this country. Ida B. Wells, I think, is one of the earliest and most important examples of this, right? The way that she used images of lynchings of Black people to investigate those lynchings, to challenge these claims that the lynchings were justified because these Black people were being accused of raping white women or other acts of violence against white people, which were often a justification used for lynchings. And she would use these images as a part of her investigation and part of her writing and documentation of this to prove that that wasn't true, right? To really reclaim the memory of those particular Black people, but also to refute a narrative that was extremely damaging. Frederick Douglass, in his time, was considered one of the most photographed people, most photographed Americans, right, of any race, who was also really, really interested in photographs and their role in shaping our role within democracy. And he said, men of all conditions may see themselves as others see them through the photograph, that being able to take photographs could be an important role in changing the face of how we saw Black people, particularly at the turn of the 20th century. But it's also really critical in terms of how we understand the years of racial cleansing that led to the theft of Black land and property. And so many people know of Greenwood, Oklahoma. They know of Black Wall Street and the story of Black Wall Street and the racial cleansing there, this prosperous Black town, and Black people essentially killed and run out of town, their property seized and stolen by white members of a nearby community. supported by local elected officials as well as sheriffs. What few people realize is that this wasn't just something that happened in Oklahoma, but it also happened in Forsyth County, Georgia, in North Carolina, in just about every state. There were prosperous Black communities that were essentially destroyed and stolen, right? You know, this image, which I use a lot in some of my my workshops, this image on the left of this Black family, the white people in the background, watching them leave with only the things that they could carry in their arms, leaving their land behind. And so this past fall, I thought a lot about this image this past fall when during the election night, as the election results were coming in, and there was a lot of focus on Georgia, which was beginning to, go in the direction of the Democrats. And one of the things that popped up was that, Forsyth County, predominantly white, now a predominantly white town, had voted for Trump almost at like 70%. And I couldn't help but think about the fact that, how different the electoral map would have looked if Black people hadn't been essentially run out of their own communities by force. This is the kind of state-sanctioned violence that has essentially changed the electoral map in this country. And made it so that just now people are on the edge of their seats wondering if Georgia will turn blue, if other southern states will. But these are the legacies and the stories that have been lost and that don't get told and that are missing from our broader narratives about how we understand even our present moment within this country. So, I think that, we have to be constantly asking ourselves, why do we forget? Why do we forget Forsyth, Georgia? Why do we forget, other towns like it? Why do these are not narratives that are part of the larger collective memory in this country? And then why must we remember? And I think that there's lots of work right now happening that is challenging us to think about memory, to think about what we remember and why. One of the reasons why, right, the why we forget is because of white supremacy. White supremacy demands that we forget, demands that Black people forget, demands that anybody who comes to this country as an immigrant forgets. And also demands that white people forget. If they want the benefits of whiteness, they have to also forget as well and participate in this fiction, right? This delusion, this cultural fiction that places them in a position of superiority. Michael Eric Dyson says that, one of the most powerful ways of challenging and ultimately destroying the ideology of white supremacy, the myth of white supremacy, and the narrative of white domination is to unearth sites of resistive memory, history, and practice. And that is really the work of public memory. I think the 1619 Project is a really great example of what happens when we recenter Black people within the public narrative about the shaping of this country. The 1619 Project set out to really challenge people to consider the consequences of slavery and the contradictions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that this was met with tremendous anger and frustration and from white historians who, when you think about history, there is a dominant accepted narrative, what the story of this country is. And no one is supposed to challenge that. And that is what the 1619 Project did. And so a group of white historians wrote a letter, a detailed letter aiming to rebut the aims of the 1619 Project. And their objections weren't around facts, right? Or, or accuracy. Their objections were much more subjective. Their objection was rooted in, they said, a displacement of historical understanding by ideology, right? Historical understanding, which is defined by a set of historians, most of them white, who believe that it is important to preserving our understanding of this country, to view the founding fathers as is without fault, heroic or tragic. And the 1619 projects, rather than seeing them as these innocent ideologues, right, who aim to create this more perfect union, instead viewed them as very complex, very strategic, very conscious white male landowners, literate male landowners who understood exactly what they were doing when they made this huge compromise around slavery. So I think that when we start to remember that we have the opportunity to begin a process of repair, that we can't start a process of repair without first actually remembering things, without really reclaiming the collective memory, the public memory. If we don't, then we end up, in situations like January 6th, right? The insurrection at the Capitol, the shock and the complete sense of confusion about what was happening, even as it was playing out, even watching the ways that these people were let into the Capitol, right? They were not even seen as threats, even as they literally made verbal threats, right? This way in which white people continue to be seen as innocent, as incapable of what exactly we saw happen. And even afterwards, the denial that conservatives had about what was happening, even though they documented it, and challenging us to really pretend as if we didn't see what we actually saw. And I think for many Black people, I certainly felt it in my bones, right? Like I felt it on a very physical, visceral, probably ancestral level, right? I remembered, right, on a deep sort of level that, when I was growing up in Philadelphia, that there were certain neighborhoods you just couldn't go walk into, right? I remembered reading the story about a Black family that moved into a white neighborhood, and then their home, and they were dragged from their homes and dragged down the streets and out of that neighborhood, right? And this is only 30 years ago, okay? And so for many of us, seeing the events of January 6th brought up lots of memories of the kinds of white violence rooted in racism that we witnessed or experienced growing up. And so we have to really contend with that. And there's lots of ways that we can do that. In the public memory work that I do, it can take many, many forms. And there's lots of examples of this around the world. More and more we're seeing it here in this country. But ultimately, I think about what David Blight writes, which is that, historians study memory because it has been such an important instrument of power. In the case of the institution of slavery, our failure to remember, our desire to deny, is a way of delaying the necessary remedies owed to the descendants of enslaved people who continue to live with the injury of slavery. And so, in 1989, this H.R. 40 was introduced, and it's been a very slow process, right? Because we refuse to really contend with the legacy of slavery. And so HR 40, which is a reparations bill, now has 40 co-sponsors as of this past year, and really aims to establish a commission that would study reparations, the importance of it, to examine the role of slavery in shaping the country, the role of the federal government, the discrimination that the descendants of slaves experience even now until this day, the ways that it has impacted and really been formative to every aspect of our country, and ultimately to recommend appropriate redress actions. So this would truly, I think about just recently in the last week or so, Joe Biden signed an executive order around racial equity. And I was reading the executive order, and was really struck from the very beginning about the way that they defined racial equity, which was there was no mention of the root causes of inequity. There was a lot of focus on remedying the treatment of the existing current today treatment of people. And I wondered what would be possible if we really thought about, truly thought about the root causes of inequity, right? That it is generational over time, and also if we saw the connection between the events of January 6th, the rise of white supremacy, and the need for an appropriate and correct redress for the legacy of slavery. But we're not there yet. We might have a ways to go until we get there. So, I think that there are lots of examples of how we've been able to do this already, right, in the country. People look at slavery as the reparations for slavery as one example of, as being this sort of primary focus and big thing, and trying to figure out how do we do this? How do we do this? And in this country, we don't have a ton of examples of how we do this, right? How we repair the harms of state-sanctioned violence to an entire group of people. But there are lots of initiatives and projects on a smaller scale that are working to do this right now, right? So one really great example is the work of organizers in Chicago with the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, which is now called Reparations One. And this was reparations for people who had been essentially grabbed by Chicago police, put into a black site, tortured until they confessed to crimes that they did not commit. These people found themselves in the same prison and started to exchange stories and talk about what happened to them, and realized that this was a huge conspiracy. And so talked to their families, and their members started to get together and organize. And it took almost 30 years, right, for them to finally, first, for there to be legal consequences for the officers who tortured them and perjured themselves and got these people to confess to crimes they didn't commit. And then after that, they said, that's not enough. It's simply not enough when we think about the scale of the harm that has been done to our community, to our families. And so began this long process in which they were, doing events in communities, talking to people about these cases, sharing these stories, right? And then talking about what repair would look like. And so, sent out a call for speculative memorials and asked people to submit their ideas of how we could remember these cases and the stories of these people. And what ended up happening is one of those memorials was a reparations bill. And that reparations bill went to the Chicago City Council. It was passed. It included monetary damages for families. It included a scholarship fund for family members a curriculum that is now taught in 8th grade and 10th grade in Chicago public schools, an actual memorial, and a trauma center in the South Side. And so most of those things have already happened, right? Except for, I think, the memorial is the last thing that they're working on. But so this is a great example of, like, when, and it can take time, but when a community comes together to demand repair, first using stories, narratives, reclaiming the narratives, and then looking to define justice based on the experiences of those who have been most harmed. Another one is, the work of the Equal Justice Initiative, who, Brian Stevenson is a lawyer, but also understands the importance of culture, understands that legal remedies alone are not enough. And so understood the importance of one, reclaiming the memory of those who had been lynched, right? They started out by putting markers around the South in places where people had been lynched, right? It's the first start. Created this lynching memorial, created a museum now that where people can actually go and learn about the sort of this direct kind of link from enslavement to mass incarceration, right? That mass incarceration is merely a new iteration of enslavement. So this is another local example here in the United States of reclaiming memory. The work of the Rikers Public Memory Project, which is a project that I co-founded 3 years ago. I had spent over a decade teaching inside of Rikers Island, working with young people there. And then we reached a point where it just became really clear that the only solution to Rikers was to close Rikers. When you look at the history, the origins of Rikers, which owned by Richard Riker, who was a judge who facilitated the capture and selling of free Blacks into slavery on the land that is now Rikers Island. The land was then later sold to the city that then decided to build a penal colony on it. We have put together this long timeline of Rikers and looked at lots of the newspaper articles from just the last century, and what you see reported over and over again is one, Rikers has always been a place of violence, of torture, of abuse, and the response has always been to try to reform it, and the response to reforming it has always failed, and it has also just grown larger and larger and larger to the point where it is the largest penal colony now in the country, and the last remaining penal colony in the country, which is another reason why it should be closed. So the Rikers Public Memory Project is a community truth and healing process, a community-based participatory initiative through which our collective stories about the impact of Rikers are activated to envision a more just NYC. Some images. The Rikers Memory Project is unique in that it includes, our partnership, it includes, my company, we serve as a kind of the cultural arm, but we also are using memory as a part of a strategy, a broader strategy to ensure the closure of Rikers. We want to make sure that people never forget, right? Never forget that, forget Torture Island. Never forget the people who have been lost there, the torture and the abuse there. Never forget that it is a living monument to white supremacy, a living kind of Confederate monument in many ways. And so we work alongside our organizing partner, the Freedom Agenda, is working to ensure the closure as quickly as possible. And we've collected 103 narratives as a part of an oral history collection of people who have been impacted by Rikers. That includes people who have been detained there, as well as family members, people who work there. And that archive is going to live in the public library, in a public archive there, and be accessible to everyone, because it is an important part of New York City history that is untold. Until a few years ago, people couldn't even tell you where Rikers was on a map. That is how invisible it was to many, until a group of students from the new school started to create a set of stickers, and they would go on the subway and they would put a sticker on this in the New York City subway map where Rikers was, right? And say, this is where Rikers was. It's not even on the NYC map, even though people travel there every single day. And so that, those kinds of like actions are acts of memory that can be really powerful. And organizing, standing on the steps of City Hall, demanding justice. This is a critical part of, the repair process. So our work is around remembering to ensure the closure of Rikers, talking about the impact long-term, creating tools to ensure that. And we're also, supporting efforts to demand repair by documenting the public health impact of a place like Rikers Island. So, we ask, more than 1,000 people across New York City, what should we remember? How should we remember? And who should we remember? And why should we remember? And so, those are the questions that should drive our work. So I'm going to stop here. I want to share with you a poem that really kind of speaks to, I don't know, what I'm thinking right now, right? About particularly this Black History Month, in a moment of dramatic possibilities and dramatic change in this country. I thought of this poem last month in the midst of, all the things that we were seeing unfold, from an insurrection to an impeachment to the election, the inauguration of a new president, and the inauguration of the first Black woman vice president. So this poem is called What America Taught Me About Love. The politics of love. Blue veins opening to reveal. Blue veins opening to reveal bloody discontent. Child, your rhythm is a bludgeoning. And so I watch you, gleefully beating out your message on stolen drums. I love you like a mother who has no safe harbor to hold you upon. I love you like the child having only known violence, claws instead of grasping. I do not know how to be gentle with myself, and so I cannot be gentle with you, America. Nor do I want to. You who built your crumbling fortress walls with blueprints stapled to the chest of those Africans who labored and contracted and birthed, though they would never find rest on the earth they spilled blood on. Peeled back the angry soil, soothing the bitter earth to plant your seeds, to grow your too rich meals, to cultivate your grand addiction, sweet with empty release. Sweet sugar baby, you are a fleeting joy. Still, we be ready to die for you, a land where freedom wafts through you, quick as wet cotton candy, quick as crack cocaine, quick as innocent flesh meeting molesting greed with only the hope of return. The reality, a kicked in door, a dream that will never crumb, a dream that wakes you in the night like a bomb, wakes you like the blast on Black Wall Street, Bloody Sunday, when Martin was killed, when Malcolm was killed, when Medgar was killed, Detroit in 67, LA in 92, blast, 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 like the jailhouse doors that slammed shut behind Mumia, Nanan, Asada, blast, blast, blast like bullets into Trayvon, Renisha, Jordan, wakes like the broken bones of young bodies in Rikers Island, wakes like bombs dropped on Osage Avenue, like the bomb dropped on Attica. Can you hear me above the crackling echo? Probably not. Erasure is threaded into the fabric of your flag. You wave it seductively, and I want to love you. But it's hard to see your beauty above the gas, the ruptured flesh and the flames. I cannot see your beauty for the blood in my eye, the explosions in my chest, the mercy you fail to spare. So for now, my love wears combat boots, leveling a machete and a shovel, to excavate the deep divides you form at your core. I hope I uncover truth and treasure. With a sharpened edge, I rip from root all that strangles your heart, leaving you numb with narcissistic fantasies, absorbed in your own glorious details. I will find you. I will find who you can be, and maybe then we can talk about a union. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. I think we're going to open up the floor for some discussion at this point. I'll pass it to you, Dr. Brown.
I want to say thank you so very much. So powerful. And I'm sure every time we listen to a professor and their research, we learn so much more things that we take for granted or things that we did not know. So thank you for sharing. I'd like to bring out Michelle Venice, who's going to help us with questions. And just for everyone to know, there is a way that you can write your questions in, and there's a chat box where you can write questions in. You may have to refresh your browser, but there are ways. So I'd like to introduce Michelle to come on.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again, Piper, for your wonderful presentation and for the words. Right now, there are no questions in the chat box, but I do have a question. Kind of what sparked your kind of aha moment to do this work, right? Because we don't wake up saying, you know what, I want to show our Black people free. I want to make sure that there is equity across the board. So what was your aha moment to say, you know what, my purpose or my walk is to do this work?
It's a good question. I think it's comes back to my own family. It really comes back to my own family and thinking about those, moments when I was younger. So my mother has 10 brothers and sisters, and she grew up, her and her siblings grew up in Philadelphia, but her parents, my grandparents, are from North Carolina. My grandmother died when she was 46, and my mother was 12 years old. And the family never, all of her siblings, they all have their own story about where they were in that day that she died, what happened in the aftermath of it. And each of them hold on so tightly to that narrative because it has shaped who they are and how they survive in the world. And any attempts to sort of I would have these, do my thing as a facilitator and try, and as an oral historian and try to bring people together and be like, let's have a conversation and let's talk about these different narratives, right? And they were like, no. It's my narrative, right? I don't want to hear what he said. He wasn't there, right? It would always go south whenever I would try to do that. And it really struck me that how we remember, our own narratives, really are an act of survival. For so many of us, and particularly for Black people. Even think about I think we can all imagine you think about those pictures in our in the family photo album. Those things are gold, right? You try to go to somebody's house and be like, oh, can I take this photo? We're like, oh no, you can't. You might get beat, right? And I'm like, I could just scan it, but it's I found a photo of my great grandparents. And someone had given it to me. My mother saw it and she was like, where'd you get that photo? Like, it was like, how do you have that photo? And I realized just how important, like, this is like, it's gold. It's like breath for people. And how we, define ourselves and how we shape ourselves and how we heal ourselves is so very much wrapped up in memory. And the same is true of our collective memory, right? We're going to keep asking the same wrong questions about what is happening in this country until we decide to actually remember the origins of how we got here. And so I just feel like that is really, my work is to be that bridge, right? Be that bridge, whether it be for my family and being able to hold multiple truths and multiple narratives, be that bridge for Black people as we define what justice looks like for us and what repair looks like for us.
Awesome. Thank you for that. There is a question in the chat. Someone wanted to know, what is the name of the poem you just read?
It is called, I call it What America Taught Me About Love. That's my poem.
And is that published anywhere?
It is not.
Got it. At
least not yet.
Gotcha.
Okay. I do have a question, Professor Anderson, and I got to say it. Just the theme this year for Black History Month is the Black family, and when you talk about the whole incarceration of Blacks, and the relationship with family, there's such a relationship there that most Black families have someone or know someone that is incarcerated. And that's very powerful. And I think that the Rikers project is so important, and I would love to see Rikers close. But I want to. The $64,000 question is, what are some of the things that we can do as a society to try to change this trend of incarcerating, young Blacks, young people of color? Because by doing that, you're taking away their ability to create memories, to create families, to create positive influence. So that's why I want to ask you, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I think, it again comes back to, I think there's a lot. One, I want to say there's like a lot of incredible work that's happening across the board in this area. How we define criminal. The notion of the criminal, right, is very much, and Gibran Muhammad writes about this, is very much wrapped up in just public representations of Blackness. And so, you go any day on social media and people are like showing these contradictions where how white people are treated within the criminal justice system and how Black people are treated in the criminal justice system. A young white woman stole Nancy Pelosi's laptop and tried to sell it to the Russians, and she was let go and sent home with her mother. Right? A Black girl is protesting peacefully protesting in the streets and is held on $1 million bond. Right? So there are two forms of justice in this country. Right? There are two different justice systems. And I think that, I'm going to be honest with you, I think that the existing system which has very much its roots within slavery, within the attempting to preserve the mechanisms of controlling the Black body. And I don't think it'll ever serve us, right? And so we have to find ways to take care of ourselves and take care of each other, right? And I think that there are like programs that do that. There are organizations that do that. But what are the ways that we are showing up for each other in our communities and our neighborhoods to ensure that we don't need to call the police, right? So that we can address violence when it happens, right? Where we can, where we have, models for ourselves that we already had, right? Of community accountability, right? You can ask your grandparents about, when they were unable to call the police and depend on the police. And they will tell you that of the ways that they took care of each other, the ways that, whether it was neighborhood watch or just showing up and somebody's sitting in somebody's couch, if their husband was acting up and like having tea and just staying there all day, right? That people had ways of taking care of each other. And we need to go back to those ways and create new ways of taking care of each other and taking care of our young people, and supporting them. But we have to really recognize that the existing system as it is, I'm an abolitionist, right? Like I think that the existing system as it is will never serve us, right? The attempts at reforming it have only led to incremental changes that ultimately have still led to the thousands of Black bodies, Black people murdered by police, and still really high rates of incarceration, because most of the people who are in those within those jail cells should not be there, should be mental health facilities, should be in drug rehabilitation programs, should be given an opportunity to work and earn a living wage to take care of their families. Angela Davis says that the prison is where we disappear our social problems, the things that we don't want to look at, that we don't want to address. We hide them within the prisons, right? The prisons become another way to erase people, to disappear people that we don't want to deal with. And so we take that out of the equation, and it requires us to turn to each other and look to each other and support each other in ways that we're not right now.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the?
So there is a question from Jacob. So I had a question about your thoughts on the larger prison abolition movement, which Dr. Mylan's question got at. So they just want to say thank you. And obviously Rikers is a particularly egregious offender that should be closed, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. So just wanted to share that comment as well.
Absolutely.
We do have a question from Professor Lemon, who's a professor in the English and Speaking, if I'm correct. Professor Anderson said, I'm attending with an honors class, Creative Imaginations Theory and Process. Could you talk a bit about any mentors, role models, or other creative individuals who have influenced your work as a creative person?
Yeah, so many. Absolutely. Yeah, so where to begin? Oh my goodness. I'm really grateful that I have so many incredible mentors that have really shaped me. And so, when I was an undergraduate, I started my undergrad at the University of Texas, and I was in a performance studies program, and so I got to meet Dr. Omi Oshun, Joni Jones there, and study with her. And I learned a lot about the adaptation of Black literature into performance, physical theater from her. Also the ritual theater. I learned so much from her about ritual theater as well. And through her met another mentor of mine, Sharon Bridgeforth. And Sharon created something she called the Institute for Radical Living, where she brought together a group of young people, young poets and artists. We would come to her house every weekend, and we'd workshop our writing, and we talk about the sort of intersections of organizing and activism with art making. And Sharon was the person who asked me, what do you want your work to do, right? Do you want it to just like build up your own reputation and your own fame, or do you want it to build community? And I knew at that moment that I really wanted my work to build community. And so learned a lot about like just the importance of being accountable, being an accountable artist, and being accountable to our people and the work that we create. who else? I mean, there's so many people. My my advisor in grad school was Dr. Daniel Banks, who also, you know, this was an incredible gift to work with, and an incredible pioneer and thinker of hip hop theater. And he really challenged me as an advisor. He really challenged me to be rigorous, really be rigorous with myself, right? As a scholar, as a practitioner, as someone who committed to sort of the balance of praxis of action and reflection in my work. So those are the people that immediately come to mind, right? There's a ton of other folks as well. I think about like the work of Sarah Lewis and the Vision and Justice Initiative at Harvard, the work that she's doing using visual imagery to have us critically, you know, think about the role of visual defining democracy and the place of Black people's place in it. And Deborah Willis, who is also at NYU, who has a book about Black Civil War soldiers coming out really soon that I'm really excited about. Also doing incredible work in visual representation and imagery. So those are people that immediately come to mind in terms of influences and mentors.
Okay, so we do have another question from Linda Rivera. She says, thank you for this wonderful and informative presentation. With today's climate of awareness and the new administration, do you think we'll see any significant changes for the Black community?
I don't want to seem like a pessimist, but I do feel, like, you know, what I'm concerned about, like I study culture, right? Like, and I study like image. And so, you know, my first out the gate was like all of the visual representations of like, you know, the president sitting down every single day and signing these big executive orders. And, you know, and I was like, oh, this makes it feel too easy, right? Like it makes it feel like, oh, he's here to save us and he's just going to sign this document and whoo, racial equity, whoo. You know, like we have these things, and then you go onto social media and you see the way that people are really kind of buying it. They're like, great, finally, we got someone on it. Oh, now I can go relax. I don't think anything will change for us unless we keep fighting, right? You know, nothing's changed, right? The game plan hasn't changed. We have a new target, right? And this administration is not going to be accountable to Black people unless we demand it. So it is still very much on us to do the work, to ensure that we hold them accountable, right? To live up to all these, like, you know, very ambitious, you know, new plans that they're putting forth. And it can't be something that just gets signed and then suddenly, you know, there's a plan. No, this takes time, right? This takes time, and it takes a willingness to really contend with the fact that, like, how we got here didn't just start 4 years ago, right? This ain't just, you know, cleaning up Trump's mess. There's a whole lot of mess that was made before Trump came into office.
It's true. I think people now just have time, right? And so they have time to actually see the mess and unfold. We do have another question from Marissa. How do you think we can shift our culture from criminalization of race and mental health? And how can we as educators make an impact?
How can we shift from a culture of criminalization of mental health? That's a great question. You know, I don't know that I have an answer, right, to how we do that. I think that one of the things that has to happen, though, is that we have to take prisons and police off the table when it comes to mental health. And I think that there's examples of cities around the country who are doing this, who are changing the ways that 911 operates so that if someone calls in distress and talk about someone who's in distress, it doesn't go to police, it goes to a social service agency. So I think we need more of that, right? Like we just like disentangling 911, emergency services, particularly around mental health, away from police. But the problem is that police have been depended on for so long as the first responders when it comes to mental health, and have been given money, have been given tons and tons of resources to be the ones to do this. But there's so much evidence that shows that if police are the first to show up, that people are in more danger. That when people who have mental health diagnoses are put into prisons and jails, that they are more likely to be abused. They end up having, infractions that lead them to stay there longer. They don't get the quality of care that they need. Also, like the thing about Rikers, it is the largest provider of mental health services in the entire state. There are more people receiving mental health care in Rikers Island than any place else in the state. Same is true in Chicago with Cook County. So jails cannot be, this de facto mental health facilities. But we don't have, community-based mental health care, right? If we had more community-based mental health facilities, outpatient facilities, then people could get the care that they needed. Right now, they don't. Also, I think that everyday people, everyone should have basic training around how to address someone in distress. I know that New York City has like a program where you can do a workshop where you understand how to do that. And that's really key because people otherwise feel powerless. They're like, I don't know what to do. And they just call the police, especially if you have a neighbor or someone in your family. You need to know how to respond in those moments so that you don't feel like you have to pick up the phone and call the police when it happens. Because people will be in more danger if we do. So yeah, I think the only answer is that we need more community-based mental health. We have to take police off the table, and we all need to be trained to address this. When I was living in Harlem, I remember there was a point where I would see so many people on the street who were there had just been just kind of this huge growth of heroin addiction in my neighborhood. And I would see people just lying on the sidewalk. And you don't know if they are passed out or if they have OD'd, right? And it's like, okay, well, what do we do? It's right. We can't just I don't want to be the person who just walks over someone and I don't know if they're dead or alive, right? So there's a workshop. The Department of Health has a workshop on, how to administer naloxone, how to tell if someone is in distress and an OD, right? These are things that we can actually do to be able to take care of our neighbors and take care of each other.
I think once the question starts flowing in, a few more are coming in. I think the program you mentioned about the mental health is NYC Thrive or Thrive NYC, and they've been so gracious that a couple of admins and faculty got a chance to go through that training a couple of semesters ago. So this question is from Hermes Torres. Does Ms. Anderson believe the arts can create change on the collective consciousness of Black America, or can it create change that is necessary?
I think it already has. I think there's no way to think about our collective consciousness without pointing to the ways that cultural movements have helped to shape us. The work of cultural practitioners are constantly shaping the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we think about the world around us. It is absolutely vital, and that work is critical now more than ever. But yeah, you think about all through history, right? I think about the Harlem Renaissance, right? When people think about the Harlem Renaissance, they think about all the art was made, but what they don't think about is this was a movement about Black consciousness. This was the first time that Black people had the space to think about who they were, right? That they weren't just surviving, right? Weren't just sort of, trying to survive and keep from being lynched, right? Or trying to get by day to day, living as indebted to the land, right? And sharecropping. They had the space to think about and write about and reflect on what it means to be Black, what in this country. And they wrote and they debated and they created art, right? And I don't think we think about this, the sort of significance of that movement on that level in terms of Black consciousness and shaping Black consciousness, and how it continues to shape Black consciousness, right? The writings that we still come back to this day. Just now, just this year, just during Sundance this very week, a film adaptation of Nella Larsen's passing is now going to be available for the world to see. Nella Larsen, an author who was writing during the Harlem Renaissance, writing about race. So, it's still very much shaping our consciousness. The, work of Zora Neale Hurston, going down across the South in her car, documenting stories, documenting folklore, documenting songs, right? We have an archive of that because of her. We have films. She created these short films. We have that because of her. We have those memories because of her. Frederick Douglass' interest in film and in photography, right? And him understanding just the value, the importance of photography and helping us to really kind of rethink the public imagination as it relates to Black people. So I think there's so many examples of the ways that, we have worked to define and redefine consciousness in this country and in the way that it's shaped others, and everyone.
Thank you for that. There's another question from Stephanie Nelson. In the fashion industry, there is only a handful of creatives I've seen in the industry. My question is, how can I educate my coworkers and peers what is offensive, how to be more inclusive, not only as a trend, but something permanently, as a young undergrad entering the industry?
It's so hard. It's really, really hard, particularly in fashion. And then there's and it's a real fine line within fashion, particularly when you have white-led fashion houses who then take an interest in Black culture, and then it becomes cultural appropriation, right? Suddenly their interest in culture becomes about appropriating that culture and selling it back to us. The consumerism nature of fashion makes it very, very tricky. But I think that, the first thing I would just say is you enter this industry or any industry, right? Anyone who's entering the workforce is to find your people. Don't try to do it by yourself, right? Don't become the person who is the go-to for all white people who want to learn how to be better. Don't do that. Find your people, build community, find each other, and support each other, and think about collectively what are the ways that you can improve the workplace for yourself and for everyone, right? And so that means advocating for those kind of changes in policy and practice that will make a huge difference, right? Whether it is just the ways that making decision making within teams more inclusive, or challenging your white coworkers to find spaces where they can reflect on their own experience and ask their questions. But I don't think that it is. I think a lot of what happens to particularly young Black people entering the workforce is that they find themselves doing a lot of emotional labor and educating people, and that's not what you're there for, right? So take care of yourself, find your people, and then think about, with those folks, how you can really advocate for broader changes that would create change on a structural level.
Great. I think that was our last question, but I just wanted to make sure I included the comment from Dr. Tardis Johnson. Awareness is a start in the Black community. I encourage a serious conversation around mental health and access to resources that address mental health. Mental health cannot be addressed if it's not diagnosed, and we have to have open conversations and remove the stigma. So I think that's the end of our questions. Piper, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for this work as we wrap this up. And just to not leave on a gloomy note, right? Because we know a lot of this work can weigh heavy on our hearts and our minds. If you can leave us with a takeaway for the community that is watching and for those who are not knowledgeable, what is this? What is the one thing you want us to leave away with to continue this fight?
I'm gonna leave you with another poem. Yeah, that's what I'll do. This one's called Listen. Let's give birth to silence of this urgent need for movement. Let's make love to the sound of our analytical, theoretical processes, quilt together political identities, draw surrealist self-portraits of the enemy. Let's be revolution that is whimsical and fantastic. Let's remember that before we were ideals, before we defined ourselves according to somebody else's theory of our existence, we were breath and nomo and dreams that were so far out of this dimension that they could only be dreamt until someone spoke them and decided that they must be lived. And so we did. Because we knew the power of words, and we knew that we descended from shaman and spirit warriors, and we knew the power of light and the color of sound when it penetrated, erupted, and transformed energy. We knew that we were midwives of tomorrow, and each moment was preparation for delivering her to the present. But somewhere along the way, we forgot the power of being human and settled for being political with the right leftist analysis. But my flesh won't let me forget. Each ache from head down spine won't let me forget. When my throat closes tight and my hands shake and I wake at night crying from dreams I can't read, I can't forget. And the revolution becomes getting out of bed each day, working though layers of barbed wire coat my back as my head winds until thoughts blend with memories, forgotten to-do lists, and decisions that threaten to be made without me. And all I want is to be held, rocked in loving hands. But somehow none of this makes sense to you. And so I've changed the way that I live, made a commitment to honoring moments, pausing in the space between each breath to greet the great infinite. And this movement, there will be the telling of stories, the laying on of hands, the revelation of bodies extending beyond the strict casings of grief, the gathering together of voices to create harmonies of transformation. So don't feed me a lecture that won't fortify my soul. I don't want to read research I can't wear, statistics just bind my hips, and I'm tired of published findings that restrict my movement. I will not allow you to flatten me into a narrative that fits your winning strategy. So if you are about revolution, you better have the courage to love until your heart breaks, allowing the quaking of frozen soma to give way to aliveness. Learn to listen. Listen with your hand pressed to the earth's pulse and be moved to tears that heal everything that grows. Listen as our prayers ricochet into unpredicted flight, bursting into a future even the best thinkers could not construct. Listen to the caravan of ancestors walking at our backs, telling us to watch for each guidepost toward freedom. Listen to each other with a lover's attuned ear, even amidst the shouting tyrant spells turning us away from each other. Listen, just listen, until it fills you up to overflowing. And then, because it is the only action that truly matters, love with a shattering might.
Wow. Thank you so very much. It was a wonderful way to end it. I love the words always listen and to love. Piper, thank you for coming to our community and sharing your thoughts as we celebrate Black History Month, which actually Black History should be celebrated all year long, but we're going to make sure that this month counts. Michelle, thank you so much for helping with the festivities. And I just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming. Please participate in the activities for the month of February. And again, Piper, thank you, and you're always welcome to FIT. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, all.
Very good. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you again, Piper. Thank you, Dr. Mylan.
Thank you.